Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking on a foundational element of modern Indian history, the Maratha Empire.
A huge topic.
It is, and it's not just about, dates and battles. This is really a critical study in state formation, military innovation, and, well, ultimately political failure.
Right.
So for you, our listener, this deep dive is the essential path to quickly mastering the story of the one regional power that truly challenged the establishment in the 18th century.
It's a remarkable story. I mean, you have to remember the context. The Marathas were the dominant regional force that emerged as this massive Mughal edifice just crumbled.
They weren't just rebels.
No, not at all. They shifted from being marginal fighters in the ruddy Deccan Plateau to becoming, the de facto sovereigns of the subcontinent in less than 100 years.
That's an incredible rise.
It is. They represent the single most viable, organized, and culturally significant Indian alternative to unified Mughal rule.
And their story is so pivotal because their ultimate failure didn't just affect them. It created the perfect conditions for the rise of an entirely different kind of power.
Absolutely.
They were the power that decided who would not rule India, and in doing so, they inadvertently cleared the stage for the British East India Company.
Precisely. The stakes were nothing less than the future of the entire subcontinent.
So our mission today is pretty comprehensive. We're going to track the Marathas from their origins, their resistance under Shivaji in the Western Deccan, and then we'll try to understand that constitutional revolution.
The shift of power to the Peshwa.
Exactly, the prime minister. Then we have to dissect the catastrophe at Panipat, explore that incredible period of recovery, and finally, analyze the crucial internal structural flaws that led to their final defeat by the British in 1818.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. So let's unpack this incredible history.
Let's start with their roots, because understanding the environment they sprang from it's really key to understanding their whole aggressive nature. The Maratha kingdom began in the 17th century, in the Western Deccan.
A very rugged, mountainous region.
Exactly. It fostered these resilient, hardy fighters.
And their identity was really forged in fire against the greatest empire in the world at the time, the Mughals. Specifically, their defining conflict came under Emperor Aurangzeb.
And this wasn't just a border skirmish.
No, this was a deep, decades-long ideological struggle.
Absolutely. The conflict was vicious. Aurangzeb began his grueling 27-year war against the Deccan in 1681. This massive, prolonged investment of Mughal resources, it didn't just drain the empire. It resulted in this deep, abiding resentment among the Marathas.
Compounded by his religious intolerance.
Right. And that established a unified, powerful purpose for the Maratha resistance that went way beyond just local boundaries.
And then the conflict hits this terrifying personal peak in 1689. This is where Aurangzeb makes what you could argue is a monumental error.
A huge one. He believed that just by decapitating the leadership, he could end the movement.
So he captured and brutally killed Shivaji's son, Sambhaji. But the cruelty didn't stop there.
No, he also captured Sambhaji's young son, Shahu.
And that act was meant to crush the movement.
But it had the exact opposite effect. By executing the king and capturing the heir, Aurangzeb transformed the resistance into a dharmayudh, a righteous, unifying war for self-preservation.
And even with the legitimate heir now imprisoned, the Maratha fight continued fiercely.
It did. It went first under Raja Ram, who was Shivaji's younger son, and then with incredible tenacity under his wife, Tarbai.
She demonstrated remarkable political and military skill to keep that struggle alive, didn't she? Even with the central figure of the dynasty gone.
She did. But this continuity, it relied on a system that harbored its own weaknesses.
The Sardar system.
Yes, the Sardar system. To keep the war machine running and reward loyalty in this decentralized struggle, the Maratha military leaders, the Sardars, they received land assignments.
And those assignments were initially meant to be temporary, right? Tied only to military service.
That's the critical point. They were intended to be temporary grants, or jagirs, but over time, they inevitably became hereditary positions.
You get this military aristocracy.
Exactly. These powerful Sardars started operating like semi-independent feudal lords. And while this decentralized structure was great for fielding armies and absorbing Mughal shahs,
they lacked a unified vision for building a coherent all-India empire.
Precisely. Their loyalty was increasingly divided between the central throne and their own regional fiefdoms.
So this structural weakness, this military system that actually encouraged decentralized power, was baked into the Maratha state from the very beginning.
It was. And the Mughals, even in their decline, knew exactly how to exploit it.
Which brings us to 1707.
Absolutely. The catalyst for the internal explosion comes in 1707, the masterstroke of Mughal decline, the Civil War of 1707.
Aurangzeb dies.
Mm.
And the succeeding Mughal powers, using that classic tactic of fitna intentional division, they release Shahu.
It's a brilliant political move.
They didn't defeat them in battle, they deployed a political weapon.
The tactical brilliance here really can't be overstated. By releasing the true, legitimate heir, Shahu, who had been imprisoned since he was a child, they guaranteed a crisis of legitimacy.
Because he immediately challenged his powerful aunt, Tarabai,
Who had been ruling in his stead and, of course, wanted her own son to maintain power.
So a full-blown civil war just erupts.
The Mughals engineered a scenario where the Marathas were forced to defeat themselves, spending decades of energy and resources fighting each other instead of attacking Delhi.
And this internal conflict, it sets the stage for the most profound yet subtle constitutional change in the entire Maratha history.
A power shift to the Peshwa.
Yes.
Exactly. Shahu eventually wins that civil war, but not through his own military genius. He wins primarily because of the political and administrative acumen of a Konkan Brahmin named Balaji Vishwanath.
Balaji Vishwanath was the administrative bedrock of Shahu's legitimacy then.
He was. And in 1713, Shahu rewards him. He appoints him as the Peshwa, or prime minister.
And this appointment is the pivot point. It looks like a standard cabinet appointment, but it marks the moment royal power really began to drain away.
It's a quiet revolution.
Yeah.
Balaji Vishwanath rapidly transformed the office of Peshwa into the functional, hereditary head of the entire empire.
Why, though? Why did Shahu let that happen?
Well, Shahu had spent so much time as a prisoner. He perhaps lacked the political dexterity or, just the sheer will to govern actively. He delegated.
And the Peshwa filled the vacuum.
Completely. Reducing the king, the Chhatrapati, to a mere figurehead, consulted only on, say, spiritual or ceremonial matters.
And then Balaji Vishwanath turns that Mughal tactic of fitna right back on its originators.
He does. He didn't rely on just fighting the Mughals. He became a master political operator by exploiting their accelerating internal chaos.
That's the key strategic move, isn't it? Recognizing that the Mughal Empire was now a political tool you could manipulate, not some monolithic enemy you had to defeat in a pitched battle. This culminates in that remarkable event in 1719. Balaji Vishwanath marches directly into Delhi and plays kingmaker.
He aids the powerful Sayyid brothers in the removal of the sitting Mughal emperor, Farrukh Shah. This wasn't just raiding, this was high-level political intervention at the heart of the empire.
And the payoff for that intervention was monumental.
It defined the next 50 years of Maratha structure. In return for their political support, Balaji secured what historians often call the Magna Carta of Maratha rule, a sanad, or an imperial order.
Granting them the official, legitimate right to collect taxes across vast swaths of Mughal territory.
Yes.
Let's break down those taxes because they are crucial to understanding the Maratha economy. They secured the right to collect shath.
Which was 1/4 of the total revenue, or 25%.
Right, the shath. But they also secured sardeshmukhi.
An additional 10% levy, claimed because the Marathas styled themselves as the chief landholders, the deshmiks of the region.
So they were essentially legally entitled to 35% of the revenue from territories that were nominally still under Mughal control.
It solidified their legitimate status and provided this enormous constant influx of cash.
And the scale of this is just astounding. It applied across the entire Deccan and Karnataka. This was the moment they officially transitioned from being rebellious mountain chiefs to a pan-subcontinental fiscal and political power.
A power recognized by the very entity they were replacing. But here we see the dark side of that structural success.
How so?
To efficiently collect chaff and sardeshmukhi across such vast, often hostile territories, Balaji Vishwanath had no choice but to assign specific collection zones or spheres of influence to the major semi-independent sardars who had supported Shahu.
So the economic necessity of collecting the money created the political inevitability of the Maratha Confederacy.
You've got it. The same mechanism that made them wealthy simultaneously guaranteed their political fragmentation.
So this decentralized confederacy meant the major chiefs immediately carved out regional power bases.
They started ruling their assigned collection zones almost entirely autonomously, only providing a fraction of the revenue to the central Peshwa and Poon and promising military aid when needed.
And this is where those key houses we hear about later really solidify their power. Who are these foundational families?
The 4 great houses that emerged were pivotal. You had the Bonsals, based in Nagpur, who became the engine for expansion into the east, heavily focused on Bengal and Orissa.
Okay.
Then you had the Gaekwads in Baroda, dominating Gujarat. And most critically for the later struggles, the Holkars of Indore and the Scindias of Gwalior,
And they were operating in central and northern India, right?
right at the cutting edge of Maratha expansion towards Delhi. That's a crucial distinction. The Scindias and Holkars are the ones playing power games in the north, while the others manage the flanks.
So it's clear that from this point forward, central authority is compromised, even as the empire itself is expanding.
The fragmentation was a feature, not a bug, of their administrative success. And on that shaky foundation, they launched their golden age of expansion.
Which brings us to Bajirao S. He succeeded his father in 1720, only 20 years old, but he dramatically amplified the empire's military power.
Baji Rao truly earned his name, the Fighting Peshwa. He was a brilliant cavalry commander, considered the greatest exponent of guerrilla warfare after Shivaji himself.
And he understood that the time for consolidating the Deccan was over. The time for conquest of the north had arrived.
Yes, and his strategic vision is immortalized in that famous quote.
Let us strike at the trunk of the withering tree, and the branches will fall off themselves.
It was a perfect diagnosis of the Mughal condition. He recognized that the provinces were still strong, but the core Delhi was hollow. Knock out the central legitimacy, and the regional powers will flock to you or just collapse.
And he backed that vision up with relentless military activity, what really stands out about his tenure.
He's dual-focused. He was neutralizing internal threats while expanding externally. He defeated the Nizam of Hyderabad, a constant powerful rival, not once, but twice.
Cementing Maratha dominance in the south.
Right. And crucially, he also successfully expelled the Portuguese from strategically vital coastal areas like Salsette and Bassein. That showed they could take on European powers.
So by the time his rule ended, the geographic span was immense. We're talking about Maratha power stretching from the Krishna River up to the Indus. He fundamentally changed the power calculus of the subcontinent.
He did, and this momentum was carried forward by his son, Balaji Bajirao, also known as Nana Sahib, who ruled from 1740 to 1761. Under him, the empire reached its formal apex.
And under Nana Sahib, that constitutional revolution that began with his grandfather was formally finalized. Tell us about the Sangola Agreement of 1750.
The Sangola Agreement is the final, definitive nail in the coffin of royal power. This document formally and irrevocably transferred all supreme administrative and military power away from the Chhatrapati king and concentrated it entirely in the office of the Peshwa.
The king was officially retired, so to speak.
To the fort of Satara, yes. While the capital formally shifted to Pune, now Pune a heart of the Peshwa administration.
And with the Peshwa's authority centralized there, how extensive did the empire become geographically?
It reached its largest ever territorial extent. The peak is often described as stretching from Cuttack in Odisha all the way to Attock in the northwest, deep into modern-day Pakistan.
That's a vast sweep.
It meant they were the undisputed masters of central India, the Deccan, and they were constantly meddling in the politics of Bengal in the north.
You mentioned the eastern expansion. What exactly did they achieve in Bengal?
The sources show the Marathas, mainly the Bonsal chiefs, engaged in these intense raids of Bengal, a very rich region. And these raids were so disruptive, they forced the Nawab, Alivardi Khan, to surrender the province of Odisha entirely.
And pay tribute.
And pay a huge annual tribute, yes. This wasn't just plunder. It was state-sanctioned extortion on a massive scale.
So by 1760, the Marathas appear invincible. They control the former Mughal capital, they collect taxes across the subcontinent. Yet, within a year, we arrive at the greatest disaster in their history.
The Third Battle of Panipat.
The seeds of Panipat were sown by that very expansion, weren't they? The Marathas, now the power behind the throne in Delhi, pushed too aggressively into Punjab.
And that overreach was seen as an existential threat by the powerful Afghan ruler Ahmad Shah Abdali.
Abdali, sensing this, moved quickly. He was a brilliant leader and secured vital alliances with Indian Muslim powers like the Rohillas and the Nawab of Awadh, Shujat-ud-Dawla.
He was building a coalition. And what's absolutely vital to understanding the scale of the disaster is the Maratha isolation.
Abdali created a united front, but the Marathas stood alone.
And this wasn't bad luck. It was a direct consequence of their governing philosophy.
Why? Why did that Hindu Padshahi ideal fail to mobilize allies? Why didn't the Rajputs, the Jats, the Sikhs, all historical rivals of the Mughals, join them?
because of the exact issue we talked about earlier, the economic model built on plunder. The Marathas had consistently taxed and raided the peasantry and regional rulers, including the Rajputs and Jats, so heavily.
That when they needed help, those potential allies saw the Afghans as the lesser of two evils?
Exactly. Their short-term revenue strategy completely destroyed their long-term strategic security.
That is a stunning failure of diplomacy and statecraft.
When the battle was finally joined on January 14, 1761, the Maratha army was led by Sadashiv Rao Wale, the Peshwa's cousin, with the Peshwa's son, Vishwas Rao, as the nominal head.
And the outcome was an absolute
A
massacre.
complete disaster. Both primary leaders were lost, and they suffered catastrophic casualties. An estimated 28,000 soldiers wiped out in a single day.
The shock was so profound that Peshwa Balaji Bajirao died shortly after hearing the news.
The empire's political and military heart was just ripped out.
But we need to look closely at why. The defeat was predetermined by factors that went far beyond just troop numbers.
That's right. Abdali did have a slight advantage, maybe 60,000 to the Marathas' 45,000, but the real story is in the logistics.
This is the detail that historians always highlight: the disastrous burden of the 200,000 civilians traveling with the army.
2 lakh people. It's almost unimaginable. Pilgrims, family members, merchants. They viewed the Northern Campaign as a massive religious journey or a chance for enrichment.
So this massive civilian convoy, it slowed the army's movement to a glacial pace.
Made maneuverability impossible, and crucially, created crippling food shortages. They were already starting before the first shot was even fired.
They were essentially a city marching into a battle against a professional mobile army. How did that logistical blunder interact with the tactical reality of the day?
Well, it forced the Marathas, who were masters of rapid guerrilla cavalry warfare, into a static, set-piece battle.
Exactly what Abdali wanted.
And on top of that, there was a profound technology gap. Abdali's forces used superior firearms, especially light artillery, like swivel guns mounted on camels. They provided rapid, concentrated fire.
While the Marathas were still heavily relying on outdated close-quarters tactics, swords, lances, and heavy, slow artillery, they tried to win the war with the previous century's tactics.
Panipat was not just a military defeat, it was a societal disaster. It removed a generation of Maratha leadership and permanently destroyed their prestige.
The long-term significance is terrifyingly clear. As historians often observe, Panipat did not decide who would rule India.
But it definitively decided who would not.
It eliminated the only organized, large-scale indigenous power that could have resisted European colonialism. The vacuum created by their collapse was perfectly sized for the British East India Company.
And that leads us to one of the most remarkable what-ifs in Indian history. The immediate, incredible period of resurrection that followed.
The Maratha story doesn't simply end in 1761. We see this phoenix-like rise under a young new leader, Maratha.
Not a row. I took over the Peshwa office at just 17, inheriting an empire that was bankrupt and demoralized. But he was a genuinely talented administrator and diplomat.
And with the brilliant administrative support of his minister, Nana Fadnavis, he managed to restore the empire's power, prestige, and financial stability.
Within a mere 11 years.
That speed of recovery is staggering. What were the key achievements that signify this resurrection?
Firstly, military consolidation. They successfully subdued the Nizam and the powerful Hyder Ali of Mysore, who was trying to take advantage of their weakness.
And secondly, and perhaps most symbolic, they reasserted their dominance over Delhi.
Yes. They brought the exiled Mughal emperor, Shah Alam II, back to Delhi in 1771, but only as their pensioner. They were kingmakers again.
So just a decade after Panipat, they are back in the driver's seat of North Indian politics. But stability remained tragically elusive, didn't it?
It did. The entire edifice was dependent on Madhava Rao's personal genius. And when he died tragically young of tuberculosis in 1772, the empire was immediately plunged back into a succession crisis.
That loss was perhaps the single greatest non-military blow to the Maratha future.
Absolutely. And the power vacuum was filled almost instantly by treachery. The infamous Barpai conspiracy.
It starts with Madhava Rao's uncle, Raghunath Rao, plotting and successfully assassinating the new Peshwa, Narayan Rao, in 1773.
Internal treachery becomes the defining feature of this period. However, this conspiracy also triggered a brilliant political response from Nana Fadnavis, the great minister.
He gathered 11 other administrators, the Barbai Council, to overthrow the traitor Raghunath Rao and protect the infant heir, Sawai Madhava Rao.
It was an administrative paradox. but it was effective in maintaining legitimacy. And during this chaos, the major Sardars stepped up to fill the military void. One name stands above them all in this era.
Mahaji Shinde, the ruler of Gwalior.
The military genius who learned the lessons of Panipat. He fundamentally overhauled his army.
Ah, so.
He realized that massed cavalry couldn't defeat trained infantry with artillery. So he hired European, especially French officers, to train his troops in scientific, Western-style warfare.
Muskets, linear formations, modern artillery.
His army became the single most professional fighting force in India.
And his power grew so immense that he didn't just fight the British. He forced them to submit diplomatically during the First Anglo-Maratha War.
Yes, the Treaty of Salbai in 1782 is his crowning diplomatic achievement. After years of fighting the British, Shinde single-handedly forced them to the negotiating table.
And the key terms were devastating for the British.
They had to formally recognize the infant Peshwa, Sawai Mahav Rao, as the legitimate ruler, and they had to withdraw their support for Raghunath Rao.
That's essentially a 20-year armistice. Shinde bought the Marathas 2 decades of peace and international recognition.
He did, but that's the critical duality. It was a massive victory over the British, but it further cemented the semi-independent status of the great houses. While Shinde was fighting, the central administration remained perpetually weak.
Sawai Rao was the Peshwa, but he'd been installed at 40 days old. He ruled entirely under the rigid, almost suffocating control of Nana Fadnavis.
It seems that the Peshwa was doomed to be a powerful administrator's puppet.
And that frustration finally boiled over. Sawai Rao, unable to escape Fadnavis's iron grip, committed suicide in 1795.
With no clear, strong central figure, and the death of Nana Fadnavis shortly after, the central authority completely dissolved.
This is the definitive moment of fragmentation. The Confederacy stops being an alliance and starts being a set of completely separate, often hostile states.
Exactly. The great houses formally carved out their independent states. The Holkars in Indore, the Scindias in Gwalior, the Gaekwads in Baroda, and the Bansals in Nagpur. They began fighting each other for influence over the now meaningless central Peshwa position in Pune.
Effectively inviting external interference.
Which brings us to the final act, the final collapse.
It starts around 1802. The tragic figure who completes the betrayal is Baji Rao II, the son of the original traitor, Raghunath Rao.
A weak man installed as a puppet Peshwa amidst the intense power struggles of the warring chiefs. He was entirely unqualified.
And the civil war among the chiefs reached a flashpoint in 1802.
When Baji Rao II and Scindia made the fatal error of executing Holkar's brother,
Holkar immediately retaliated. He marched south, attacked, and defeated the combined armies of the Peshwa and Scindia at the Battle of Pune.
the Marathas were openly, disastrously fighting each other, and this internal defeat provided the perfect opportunity for the waiting British.
Completely terrified by Holkar's victory, Baji Rao II fled to the British and signed the infamous Treaty of Bassein in 1802.
And this is where we need to delve deeper. The mechanism of the betrayal was the subsidiary alliance.
What was that exactly?
The subsidiary alliance was the British masterstroke in colonial statecraft. It was a contract where the Peshwa surrendered his entire sovereignty in exchange for British protection.
So how did it work?
3 things. First, the Peshwa had to accept a permanent British military force stationed within his territory, paid for entirely by the Maratha treasury. Second, he had to accept a British political resident who would oversee all internal political affairs.
And third,
And, most critically, the Peshwa surrendered his right to conduct any foreign policy or warfare without British consent.
so Baji Rao II literally handed over the military and diplomatic keys to the empire to a foreign power. He traded sovereignty for personal safety.
That single act was the surrender of Maratha independence. It single-handedly triggered the final wars.
The remaining isolated Maratha chiefs were furious but unable to unite effectively.
The British now had a legal pretext, through their puppet Peshwa, to intervene and enforce the treaty on all the chiefs. The result was the systematic dismantling of the Confederacy.
The final nail in the coffin was the Third Anglo-Maratha War from 1817 to 1818.
The isolated chiefs were defeated one by one. The Peshwa, Baji Rao II, finally surrendered. The position of Peshwa was formally abolished, ending the Maratha state structure entirely.
Baji Rao II was pensioned off to Bithor near Kanpur, a final humiliation.
And as we know for historical context, that humiliation didn't end with him. His adopted son, Nana Sahib, later inherited that resentment, becoming one of the key leaders in the Great Revolt of 1857.
Carrying the banner of Maratha failure into the next major conflict.
It connects the 2 centuries perfectly. But now we have to step back. Why did this state, which was militarily brilliant and politically astute enough to rule from Cuttack to Attock, ultimately fail?
The military narrative, it only tells half the story. The core question is why they failed structurally to become a modern state capable of resisting the British.
The failure rests on three interconnected structural flaws, starting with the social failure. They did not transform the governing ethos.
How so?
They maintained the same decadent social structure they inherited from the declining Mughals. The revenue farming, the excessive taxation, they were simply replacing one set of oppressive rulers with another. They never forged a deep popular bond with the common people.
And this leads directly to the economics law, the reliance on plunder.
Absolutely. The Maratha economy was fundamentally flawed because it relied heavily on forced revenue collection, chath and sardashmuki, which was essentially legalized plunder. They didn't develop sustainable trade, industry, or critical infrastructure.
Because if your autonomy relies on continually taxing other people's territory, you have to continually maintain a massive, expensive military force to enforce that collection.
Precisely. They were conquerors who never successfully transitioned to true state builders. They consumed the wealth of others without generating sufficient sustainable wealth themselves,
Which meant they had to tax the peasantry under their direct rule brutally.
often up to 50% of the produce, just like the Mughals.
Yeah.
And the political consequence of that was immediate alienation and isolation, which we saw at Panipat.
Yes.
Because they taxed everyone heavily and failed to integrate the various populations, they lacked deep popular support. So when the British, a determined and unified external shock, finally came calling,
The Marathas had no broad patriotic base, no ideological unity, and certainly no unified economic interest to rely on.
and the Sardars, realizing they could cut a better deal with the British for their own local domains, chose fragmentation and self-preservation over unified imperial defense.
So they were perfectly suited for the anarchy and internal decay of the 18th century, brilliant at exploiting Mughal weakness. But they were entirely unprepared for the sophisticated, centralized power of 19th century British colonialism.
They were the masters of the decentralized feudal alliance, facing the machine of the centralized military state. The outcome was, sadly, inevitable.
That was an incredibly dense and comprehensive deep dive. We tracked that subtle power shift to the Peshwa. We identified the fatal structural flaw built into the collection of Chat and Sardashmuki, and we analyzed why the failure was ultimately rooted in economics and social oppression, not just military weakness.
The core lesson is that the Marathas achieved their greatest successes not through direct military confrontation, but through administrative and political strategy, using fitna and securing the legitimate right to taxation.
Which leads us to the final provocative thought that we want you to chew on. If the Maratha ideal was Swaraja, a sovereign state, what does it say about their priorities? That they chose to prioritize immediate decentralized revenue collection through the Confederacy over unified, centralized political authority. The very mechanism that generated their wealth, the assignment of Choth collection to the Sardars, simultaneously guaranteed their inevitable political fragmentation. Was the Maratha failure simply the inherent failure of feudalism to build a lasting modern empire?
It raises the question of whether any powerful alliance, built primarily on the promise of shared spoils and decentralized control, can ever truly achieve sovereignty in the face of a unified, highly focused external power. The very thing that made them a confederacy of riches made them a collection of targets.
Food for thought indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Maratha Empire. We will see you next time.